Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. The case that I've got today, I actually came across and found very interesting, so I wanted to share with you. It's the murder of Louisa Jane Dunne. Now, let's jump in and I will tell you all the details. Louisa Jane Dunne was born actually as Garrett in 1892. She lived in Bristol in England and was a working class woman. She ended up marrying a guy called Edwin Teddy Parker, and together they enjoyed their life. They ended up having two daughters, Iris and Edna, and they were active members of the local Labour Party. But sadly she lost her husband. He passed away in 1945, and obviously that had a big toll on her. In 1952 she did marry again. His name was John Dunne, but again, sadly, she was widowed for a second time. He died in 1961, so they got to enjoy 9 years together. She was heartbroken. Having been widowed for the second time, she became a lot more isolated and secluded and withdrew more into her own home and things like that. Despite her being kind of reclusive, she did have good relationships with people. You know, people would see her walking around and around the shops, and she was just a constant fixture. Her next door neighbour would leave daily newspapers out for her, and she would read them like the next day. She was described, Louisa, as being very security conscious. She would never open her windows or leave them open or anything like that. But her neighbours did become concerned. At this point, she's 75 years old. They hadn't seen her at all. And this was on the 28th of June in 1967. And that is one of the reasons they knew something was wrong. Because, like I say, they hadn't seen her, but when they went round, they saw that one of her windows was open, and she would never do that. So they knew something was wrong. One of the neighbours went into her home, and they found a horrific discovery. She was deceased. Her body showed signs of violence. She had like cuts and lacerations near her chin. She had bruises on her neck and her inner thighs, and she was found lying on her back on a pile of old clothes in her living room. Of course, her neighbours were traumatized, and so they rang the police. Forensics came. They determined that she had been essayed, and her cause of death was asphyxiation. They put her estimated date of death around from the 26th to the 28th. It was said that when the neighbour first went round, they looked in through the window at first, climbed up on this stool and windowsill, I guess, and looked inside, could see her body, and initially thought, you know, oh my gosh, she's had a heart attack or something like that has happened. Never ever did they think this had happened. Now, forensics did find a partial palm print, and this sparked a massive fingerprinting thing where they ended up fingerprinting over 19,000 people. They didn't find the correct fingerprint, mind, but yeah, it was humongous, and that was by March of 1970. Despite having these things, they never found her killer, so her case just was cold for so many years. They had a detective on it every now and again, would bring it back up and look into it, but it lay dormant for 57 years. 57 years. That was until May of 2023. They decided that they were going to look into this blue skirt that Louisa had worn. They did DNA testing on it because they had a sample from before, but sadly that had gotten lost over the years, so they no longer had the DNA sample. So they decided to test this skirt, and they found some DNA on it, and they put that into the DNA database, and a match was found. It came up to a guy called Ryland Hadley. He had done a routine cheek swab with the Suffolk Police in 2012, and it was something totally unrelated, a different investigation. So his DNA matched. They began to look into him. He was now, at this point, 92 years old, but he was still alive, and he was living in Ipswich. He was originally from Jamaica, and in 1956 he came over to the UK and settled in Bristol. He got a job working on the railways. He ended up marrying. She was called Maggie Norris. She, you know, at this moment in time of him being arrested, she was no longer alive. She had passed away. But they did have 3 children together. So he was a father, a loving husband, and the reason that he was never sort of fingerprinted or palm printed or whatever at the time is because after the murder he relocated house, and it was just outside of the area that they were actually searching. He was thought to be a nice, quiet guy, you know, again another sort of monster living next door that nobody really knows about. His trial actually occurred in June of this year, 2025. It was brought forward. He never admitted it. He said that he didn't do it. Of course he did. I think he also... No, don't know. Hang on. The problem with that is they had DNA, and it was literally said that like it was a billion times more likely to be his DNA than anybody else's. And they also had his palm print, because when they tested that, the partial palm print, it matched too. It's just the nail in the coffin, really. The judge said that Louisa Dunne was a poor elderly lady who was quite small. She was living alone, and that he treated her as a means to an end. He violated her and stole away her life, and just heartbreaking. But, you know, thankfully he was found guilty of the murders. Murder. He was sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 20 years. He is 92 years old, so never getting out. It is believed, though, that he is the oldest person to ever be convicted in the United Kingdom, which I found pretty interesting. 92. He abused and murdered an elderly woman who's 75 years old, and he got away with it for so long, but, you know, justice caught with him in the end. And again, I'm quite happy about that. It is a shame it took so long. If his DNA was on the system since 2012, you know, if they would have just sort of thought about doing the skirt a bit earlier. And I mean, DNA is improved a lot by now, so obviously hindsight's everything. And I can say this now, but yeah, it's just a shame that it wasn't a little bit earlier. But justice caught up with him in the end, and, you know, the rest of Louisa Dunne's family, who are still surviving, were like so ecstatic that her murder has finally gotten solved, and the person that did it is finally behind bars. So yeah. Another one for genetic testing, and DNA is the best thing ever. Thank you so much for watching. That is the end of this case, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.